people will never say no to the boss. They take what they get for their labor, while others will stand up whatever the cost to fight for the rights of a neighbor. Every day, every night, will you fight for the things you believe in? Will you stand all your life, hand in hand with the power of the union? Most people can never say what's on their mind. In hard times, you hardly can.
So I'd like to welcome two people who I've admired and have been friends with for a very long time. George, a number of times in person, and Cy, numerous times via video. This is George Mann on the left, Cy Kahn at the bottom. And these two guys just came out with a brand new album. It couldn't be more perfectly timed. And there you see it. It's called Labor Day. And for those that are watching this on video, that's it. And I tell you, two guys who are so involved in the unions and the labor movement and various causes that I can't even begin to count them on both hands. George and Cy are just incredible people, and I am so happy to have them both here today. This is George Mann and Cy Kahn, and we're going to talk about this new album titled Labor Day. George, Cy, welcome.
Hello.
Marty, it's great to be back.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure, brother.
I just wish we could be in the same room so we could have a nice glass of wine or something together, but we'll have to do that virtually.
That would be so great. In any event, let's talk about, well, why don't you each individually first, for those that don't know you, talk a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the album.
George, you want to start out?
Yes, because I'll be brief. This album is really to celebrate Cy and his music, and that's the main reason we put this together. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. I'm a folk singer based in Ithaca, New York, a former union organizer who had to make a decision about 15 years ago. I was either had to do music or stick with union organizing work, and I chose music as a full-time occupation. Left New York City, and I've been in Ithaca for 14 years now. Enjoying it. I do a lot of my work, as Artie knows, with veterans and nursing homes when I'm not on the road. But this album came about because we knew Cy was turning 80, and I've been recording some of his songs in recent years. And he kind of slipped it to me last summer in an email saying he really would like it if some labor folk singer would put together an album of his songs. And he was out wondering if I knew anybody. And I didn't get the joke at first, but I think he was thinking about me. And here we are now about a year later, and the album is literally in our hands and going to be live at the end of August, just in time for Labor Day.
It's fantastic.
Well, George is correct. I sort of snookered him into this. And it's both because he's really brilliant as a musician. He can't say that. He's a wonderful musician. But he also shares with me the history of being a union organizer for many years. And so there's a sort of a simpatico alignment here. And I wanted to do the album with someone who shared that set of values, who understood the labor movement, who could talk about it, who could talk about why in this particular time unions are so necessary to working life, to family life, to community life. And George is not just sharing the title honors with me. Is that the album is by Cy Kahn and George Mann. We're partners in this, but he's also the producer of the album. And Lord have mercy, has he worked hard and done a beautiful job.
Really.
Well, it
George.
started out already as initially Psy's idea was that he had a bunch of unreleased songs or songs that people hadn't heard or had never been on any of his records. And he thought maybe we could delve through some of them and I would record, 10, 12, make a record of his unreleased labor songs. Other artists like Joe Jenks and the Looping Brothers and just recently Phoebe Reese, as you know, have done albums of Psy's songs.
Uh-huh.
And my response was, well, I don't know if that would sell so well because I'm not that big a name in the business, But I also thought that with all this wealth of material that he had, and that other people have recorded, I've been hearing other people record side songs for years. Great friends of mine, Joe Jenks, Magpie, they've all recorded his songs, John McCutcheon, right? And so we started talking about a broader concept, which would be maybe Psy had some stuff in the archives that he could bring to the table of him because he'd be the first to tell you at 80 years old he can't sing and play like he used to, but he had plenty of stuff in the archives. And then we started looking at all these songs and he made a list and I made a list of songs by other artists of his that the other artists had recorded. And we ended up we were initially talking two CD
It's true.
album.
It's true.
And that was I didn't know that we could make that work. But as producer, he let me take the role of weeding through all that stuff and trying to figure out what we could create. So in the end, we ended up with 5 songs that Psy had recorded years ago, just his guitar and vocal, that we added harmonies and other musicians from my studio in Ithaca, where I work. And then we recorded 4 songs from scratch with my musicians and me singing lead. So there's 9 songs. Actually, there's 10 because there's a song of mine that I recorded of Psy's called "They All Sang Bread and Roses" on the album also. But we ended up with this mix of new material that nobody's ever heard and some of the greatest songs of Psy's in the labor field. Remember, he's written about a lot of things, but we want to keep the focus on workers and unions for this album. And Psy came up with the Labor Day title because we were initially trying to we were thinking we might be able to get it out for May Day, but then when we realized what we wanted to do, and that it would take more time to get the recordings together. And so we ended up recording 9 songs at Wilburland, the studio in Ithaca that I've been working at for years and that Artie knows I praise all the people who I work with and the studio owner, Will Russell. And then we found these other songs that we knew would fit in with the theme of what we were trying to create, an album of songs about workers and the struggle for a better world, and especially through the union movement, which we're both so close to.
Which is why the subtitle of the album is A Tribute to Hardworking People Everywhere. And it really is. I think we've looked at different types of work. We've looked at everything from people who are so committed to the union to people who are scared to join a union because of the counteroffensive from the corporations and from the bosses and the power that bosses and corporations have over far too many workers. So we're trying to do a whole range of themes, not something narrow. And I think we're not saying the union right or wrong. I don't think it's narrow in that perspective. We're trying to talk about the complexities of all of this, and it is complex. We've both spent years working as door knocking on the ground, shift meetings, community meetings. The nitty gritty work of organizing is not about making speeches. It's not about telling people you've got to join the union. It's about listening to people. When people say to me, what's the most important thing if you're going to be an organizer? And that's labor organizers, community organizers, environmental organizers. And I say the most important thing is the ability to shut up and listen, not to tell people what to do, but to ask them what they think needs to happen. And my experience over 60 years of organizing is everyday working people know the answers to the problems that beset them, but they only know a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the puzzle. And our jobs as organizers is to help them and the people they work with, the people they live with, put those pieces together until there's a whole perspective and a strategy that works successfully. Our job is not to tell people what to do, to work with them as they figure out what to do together to win the victory.
That explains it perfectly. I mean, I couldn't say it any better than that. So what do you guys think? I mean, what you just spoke about, the importance of unions in light of our country today. What's important for us as, human beings, regular people, working people? What's important for us?
I'll respond to that. And what Artie was asking is what's important to us in today's environment. And what's very clear is that the sentiment about unions is becoming more visible, and it's always been strong union. So I said a few minutes ago, we're not here to tell you whether union right or wrong, but we know what the answer to that question is. Workers always do better with a union, right? The rare exception is when you have a corrupt leader who ends up going to jail, right? But there's so much more corruption in the business side of things than there will ever be in the union side of the equation. But what's important is, look, I live in Ithaca right now. UAW at Cornell is on strike. 1,200 workers,
Mhm.
maintenance workers. They've been without a contract since June. Cornell is one of the richest universities in the country, and they won't give a fair living wage to these workers. And these are the bottom of the barrel of economically. These are the people, not the professors and the scientists, Starbucks, right? All three unionized stores and Starbucks voted for the union in 2022. 13 to 1, 18 to 1, and 17 to 1. And Starbucks closed all three of those shops in my city in the last year. Now, they were making plenty of money there, and they closed them to send a message to chill the union movement. So what we're seeing is people want a union. It's just the hurdles we have to go through and the lack of penalties against unscrupulous bosses and companies that penalize workers for choosing their right to have a union. So that's, I think, what's becoming clearer. And boy, I'm no Democrat. I've always been an independent, but you're hearing more talk about unions from the Democratic Party in the last few weeks than ever before. And, people talk about Biden as being one of the most pro-union presidents in recent history, certainly in our lifetime. Well, that's true, even though he hasn't accomplished a heck of a lot because of the roadblock that the Republican Congress has put up.
Right.
But so those things are important. A living wage, fairness in the workplace, and a chance to advance. That's always been what workers and unions want.
Well said. Well said. Does you have anything to add to that, Si?
Well, I think that part of what's happened in the United States specifically, most countries, most industrialized countries have laws much more favorable to organizing, far fewer roadblocks, and a much more organized, unionized workforce. And the irony is that these countries are the ones that provide healthcare to everybody, free education to everybody, and that makes them more economically competitive. What we have is a bad jobs policy, not a good jobs policy. And in the United States, and actually increasingly worldwide, we've seen an increasing gap between those who have the investments and those who do the work. 30 years ago, the average corporate CEO made about 20 times what the average on the floor worker made. Today, the ratio is like 2,000 to 1, 3,000 to 1. We have corporate CEOs who are making 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. And we have people like Elon Musk who's worth $250 billion. That's sinful. That's shameful that there is such a disparity when people are arguing over, well, could we raise the minimum wage beyond the federal minimum, which is still $7.35? You try to tell me how you can raise a family, survive on your own on $7.35 an hour. And yet we have this extreme wealth standing in the way. So, I think George talked quite eloquently and quite accurately about the rising desire to be unionized. Every poll that's ever done says at least 60% of American workers wish they were represented by a union. In the private sector, only about 7% of workers are represented by a union. That's because of the Neanderthal labor laws we have, and it's because companies are allowed to get away with murder both every day in the way they deal with their workers and then long term in the way in which they deal with attempts to block unionism. I think we're seeing a change and a shift, and I believe we're going to have a labor revival as powerful as what we saw in the 1930s.
Especially with this wave that's coming in this election and the way things are looking, right? Because when you look at Artie, I mean, the basic things we ask for as union organizers and as union members, the ability to have card check, right? So that we don't have to have this delay between the time when workers go forward with their request for a union and the time they get a vote. That's typically 60 to 90 days. And if the company fights, it can go even on longer and longer before they even get a chance to vote for a union. Compulsory arbitration on first contracts. 30% of unions never get a first contract after they win the election because the boss keeps fighting and firing workers and delaying the negotiation of a fair contract. Things like that, triple damages when a boss violates the law. There's no penalty. The penalty is virtually pennies. They have to pay back pay to a worker if they fire them, but there's no penalty for firing them. So these basic things would be, as Cy mentioned, are in other countries where there's a higher percentage of workers unionized because they have better laws to protect, and people are not as scared and intimidated by the bosses, or the actions of the bosses are not as effective because the laws are stronger for the workers. We're hoping for that, and as Cy says, you got to put people in Congress and in government who will vote for these changes to get them back in, to get in place. In some cases, we're getting back rights that they're taking away. We're trying to get back, right? We used to have the right to secondary strike, but we don't since the 1940s, right? Things like that will never happen in this Congress, but we hope, right? We can hope.
We hope.
But this music that we put on this record is to try to kind of, as I said, give a picture of all aspects of work. We're not beating them over the head with the union message. I think those 6 or 7 of the songs mention union in the title or in the chorus, but a lot of other songs are just about the experience of workers and what workers go through and the kind of struggles they have to make a life for themselves and their families in the workplace. And that's what we were able to do. Like I said, to find a nice blend. We whittled it down to 21 songs, and we were still in the last weeks of production cutting songs that we wanted on the album, but just couldn't make fit, and try to keep it in one package, in one album. So I think we did a good job, and we worked together on it because, Cy had some personal favorites that didn't resound with me, and I had a few songs that I didn't think would resound, with others. But, in the end, we ended up with a real nice blend of songs, I think, and a good mix between the new material that nobody's heard. Billy Bragg, for example, recorded a song that no one's ever heard before called We're the Ones. It's an unreleased Cy Kahn original that Billy took and made his own. John McCutcheon did an beautiful a cappella version of Go to Work on Monday, a powerful song about a worker who's at the end of his career, health-wise and work-wise, but he still has to keep going to work. So there's some surprises on the record too that we weren't expecting when we started on this road 8 months ago to make it.
Well, I want to say too that too often labor music, political music, it's didactic. It hits people over the head and it misses the joy. It misses the pride. It misses the fact that people love to go to work. And while they may not like all the working conditions, that's where their friends are. That's where the community is. That's where they fall in love. That's where they meet friends. And, when I was a union organizer for the Textile Workers Union, I've worked with many different unions. We'd have parties. We'd go fishing together. We'd have bands come out and play at our rallies. We'd eat barbecue. It's not just about working conditions. It's about a full, rich life that becomes possible when you are in relationship with people that you respect, people that you've worked with, people you've known for years. It can be joyous. It can be enlightening. It can be wonderful. It can be funny. And we try to catch that too. We didn't want to do depressing, oh my God, work is awful. I'm going to die. Maybe I should have a union before then. No. I think this is a a joyful album. And part of what works, in my experience, but I think in the experience of a lot of other people, it's not in the same way as I talked about. You don't tell workers what to do, you ask them what they think they need. In the same way, I don't think labor music should be exclusively about singing to working people. It's about singing with working people so that they see themselves reflected in the songs, but they're also singing along. So on this album, we deliberately chose a number of songs that, in many cases, George is just beautifully like, Were You There? Where the whole point is that we sing them together. Not that as individual artists, as musicians, not that we sing them to people, but we get people singing along together. And that is extraordinarily powerful. There are only so many things that a group of people can do where they actually are doing the same thing at the same time. You can pick it, you can demonstrate, you can dance, and you can sing. The experience of singing together, really powerful, really affirming, really uplifting. And in some ways, we want to be modest about this, but we are hopeful that after 100 years of we're going to roll the union on, maybe it's time for some new songs. And we hope that some of the songs on this album will be taken up by other labor song leaders and will give people the will to keep on.
So great. I'm speaking with two incredible people, Kahn and George Mann, who have a new album titled Labor Day. Well, I have it backwards here. And there it is. There's the cover of the album. People can get this now. How would they be able to get this?
Well, the easiest way is go to our websites, either cycon.com or georgemanmusic.com. By the time this airs, it should be available on all the streaming and downloading services. We specifically did not put it on TikTok or Spotify for our own personal reasons, but it will be on the other mainstream ones. And we're trying to set it up, and we believe it will be downloadable right through our websites also by Labor Day.
Wonderful.
Again, we're working on that. And so people can just order it directly through us by mail or through the internet, ways that there are. They can get in touch with us. Hey, I want to say one other thing about this as a producer. So I was touching on it just a minute ago. You know, we ended up doing 9 songs of size that had never been heard or never been released or recorded in those those ways. The challenge for me as a producer was not to put together the songs we're recording, because Cy writes such singable, powerful songs. Sometimes in 2 minutes, he can hit you over the head more effectively than anybody else could in 3 or 4 minutes, The exciting thing was this, as you know already, I've done other compilation albums, the 4 Hail to the Thief albums, the 2 Until You Come Home albums, where they're compilations of songs about a specific topic, right? In the first case, it was against George Bush's regime, and in the second case, the album's about PTSD and veterans. But those are all completed songs where I just had to compile an album from completed songs. The challenge here was we're recording new music that we wanted to blend in with songs. Some of them were recorded 30 or 40 years ago. Remember, you got Peggy Seeger doing Aragon Mill, recorded in the 1980s. Truck Driving Woman by Kathy Fink and Marcy Marks are in the mid-80s. Magpie's song was recorded in the 80s. Some of these songs are 20, 30, 40 years old. So to make that all sound whole and to blend that into one album, which we hope people will listen to from start to finish, right? At least once, was a part of the challenge and part of the fun of making this. We brought horns in, we brought in fiddles and strings into some of these songs. And that's stretching it for me, as a producer and as an artist, because I'm working with someone else's song who's entrusted me to bring a finished product. And of course, I'd consult Cy while we were working on the album. What do you think? Or he would come up with an idea and say, can you try this or put this on the song and see if it works? and 99% of the time we agreed with each other about decisions we made, and we came up with a really nice mix of music, of new music and older songs of his that have been recorded by other people.
Well, I'd only make one correction. George, you very kindly said, we did this. No, you did this. I mean, this 99% of the creativity, the imagination was your work. And part of what I love as a songwriter is hearing what other people hear in my songs, in my music, which is not necessarily what I hear. I mean, I didn't hear horns on several of these songs, but oh my God, they're gorgeous. I didn't hear piano riffs, but they're beautiful. And that is, we did not do that. George did it, and he corralled the musicians, the herding cats of working with individually creative people to make a whole that has integrity, that has beauty. So yeah, I was there watching, but George did it.
Yeah, well, and part of it is I've got such a wonderful crew of musicians. Artie, it's the same musicians that have been on my last 7 albums that you've featured every time I've come to see you every couple of years when I make a record for the last 15 years, And so it was knowing those players and knowing the studio and Will Russell's work, which again cannot give enough praise to because he is one reason I live in Ithaca is because Will Beland's studio is nearby, and I moved here 14 years ago from New York partly for that reason. But also, like I said, we had a lot of great people who love Cy's work and have recorded his work over the years. So, when we started talking about this album, Spinning Mills of Home by Magpie, The Old Labor Hall by Joe Jenks, those were top of my list, right? And then we found other songs that had been recorded 20, 30 years ago by other artists, and we were able to cobble together what we ended up with 21 songs on the record.
Incredible, guys. I want to thank you both for being with me today, and just wishing you the best of success in the future and the best of success with this album. Like I said, it's going to hit the top of the folk charts. So get it while you can. It's hot. And thanks, Cy. Thanks, George. And,
thanks, Artie. Great job.
Thanks to
Great
both
job,
of you.
both of you.
Don't
Great.
worry.
Looking forward to Artie. Hope to see you in the same.
To err is human. To forgive, divine. We hope people forgive our music.
Thank you.
Nothing to
All right,
forget.
Cy.
Love you
All right,
guys. Have
Thanks,
a good
Artie.
afternoon.
Talk to you guys soon.
On the highway headed north, just back and forth. Sometimes I feel like a rolling stone. From the rolling mills of Gary to the rolling hills and spinning mills of home. All along the river, railroad tracks are red and rusty. Cotton fields all dry and dusty. You can taste it in your mouth. How you've heard some people say how they've got one foot in the grave. Well, I've got one in Indiana and the other